Hi creators, it's Claire from Right Accounts, and today in this video I'm going to be talking about something that really stops people in their bookkeeping tracks and why you actually shouldn't let it impact your progress. So what is that thing that just seems to bring everything else to a standstill? Errors. Now, let's get seriously honest and say there is a likely to always be at least one thing wrong in your bookkeeping. So there's likely to be an error of some description because it's called being human, especially if you're doing your own bookkeeping. It is basically 100% likely there is going to be a transaction that's incorrectly allocated. It's 100% likely there are going to be expenses missing, and it's, you guessed it, 100% likely you're going to repeat some of the same mistakes you've made in the past. Now, one of the principles of bookkeeping and accounting and finance that often gets overlooked in the pursuit of this perfectionism is materiality. Is something material? Is a transaction material? Really, what we're doing is asking whether something is significant, whether it will impact the financial reporting in any actually meaningful way. And what's material, as we say, is influenced by the size and the type of your business. So there's not one rule to rule all materiality. So what kind of things are we talking about? We talk about significance. So that 1 cent rounding on GST is not material to pretty much any size business, because when we do GST, we actually take away the cents anyway. That 54-cent international transaction fee being charged as bank fee versus being incorporated into the actual expense is not material for most businesses. Maybe if you're running a large operation with lots of international transaction fees, it would be useful to track those charges, but it's not necessary, and it's not really going to impact how we report our total expenses. Then, we have bank reconciliation discrepancies. They come up a lot, believe me. So let's say you have one for $12.95. Now, that might be material, might be significant to a business that turns over, say, $15,000 a year. But it's probably not going to be significant to a business that turns over $15,000 a month. $12.95 in a $15,000 a month business is probably not going to be significant. Missing one $25 expense, again, may be significant for a smaller business operation, but for that $15,000 a month business, they are barely even going to notice one expense of $25 missing. And then there are some things that apply to pretty much all business sizes. Say there's an unpaid invoice of $5,000, that's probably significant to most businesses. Now, the reason this concept of materiality or significance or impact, as you may want to refer to it, is important is that we aren't actually striving for perfection. What we're looking to do, what we're striving to achieve, is a reasonable representation of the financials of the business. We want it to be good enough to be able to make decisions from, to be able to do some analysis on, but really we're looking for that accurate representation, not perfection. We're not actually looking for perfection, even though there's so much focus on it. And so what I often see happens is that this one thing, one error, one transaction we're not sure what to do with brings the entire bookkeeping system, the entire process to a halt. People get freaked out because there's something wrong or there's something missing, and it feels insurmountable because we're wearing that perfectionist hat. When we have that hat on, everything has to be perfect, and it's really then easy to fall into this, well, if this one's wrong, I may as well give up on anything. It's like falling off the bandwagon. But in reality, we need to keep going. It's actually in our best interests to keep going because A, it doesn't need to be perfect as long as it's a reasonable representation. And actually, lots of the pieces of bookkeeping and finance work independently. The processes work independently. So that one error doesn't, in all likelihood, impact every single thing that is also happening in your bookkeeping. Transactions really don't rely on each other to be irrelevant, and transactions come from lots of different sources. So what's happening in your PayPal account, for example, may or may not, most likely not, impact what's happening in your bank account, impact what's happening with your invoicing. Like, they're independent, they work independently of each other. So what are some examples of this independence? So if your bank reconciliation is off, so it's not matching your bank statement, or maybe your bank feed stopped for a few days, it shouldn't stop you sending invoices and entering copies of your receipts, because what's happening in your bank doesn't impact what's happening in your sales and expenses. Maybe you lost a receipt, but don't allow that transaction to taunt you every time you log in. Square it away so that you don't avoid processing all the transactions because you keep remembering that one's missing. It's missing, it's done. Maybe we'll find it later and then we can come back and correct it then. Maybe, like I said, your PayPal connection failed because you updated your password and you can't get the two-factor authentication to work. That's just me, maybe. But this doesn't impact your regular bank account data or entering your mileage, for example. There are so many different independent transactions, independent sources of data that we can actually keep going. So the big shift it's important to make is accepting that these errors are going to occur. So even I make mistakes pretty much every week, and I just have to keep moving through them. So adopting that attitude of learning and practice and just accepting that you need to hone your skills really helps us to just see an error, accept that error, learn a lesson maybe from that error, and then move on. And even if we're not learning lessons, even if we're not sure how to fix it, we just need to keep moving on. Now, I'm not suggesting we simply just ignore the issue and pretend it doesn't exist, but instead that we kind of quarantine that issue. We don't allow it to derail our progress of everything else, of getting up to date, of keeping up to date, of keeping going. That's so important. So exactly how would you, quarantine will depend on the transaction. Mostly, and the one I recommend most is just make a note that there's an issue. Write it down somewhere that you can easily refer back to it, and then we can return to that area when we have some support or maybe after some research. If you have a receipt that's missing, maybe you returned an expense and you're waiting for a refund, those sort of things, just note it down and kind of pretend like you're ignoring it. We're not actually ignoring it, we're just pretending like we're ignoring it. If it's related to a bank feed or a PayPal feed, like say the feed didn't work for a couple of days, go and get the information and upload it when it's available. But don't stop processing the transactions that come through in future while that error exists. So see, maybe the bank transactions went offline 10th of February to the 15th of February, and we've just not had time to go back and pick those transactions up. So it's no point doing the rest of February. There is a point. Start on the 16th, move forward, just make a note that you need to go back and pick up the 10th to the 15th. And then maybe if your bank doesn't reconcile, we can note that discrepancy amount. Maybe it is that $12.95 I said, because we would expect to see that same discrepancy at the end of the next month and the end of the next month and the end of the next month. So we're just expecting to see that $12.95 discrepancy now. We know there's an issue with that. That's okay. Doesn't need to stop us doing our reconciliations. And then maybe when we have a little bit more time or support, we can go back, track where that $12.95 came from, and maybe resolve it or maybe just write it off because it's not significant. So how are you going to get help? Because you will need to revisit those quarantined items, most likely, and it can actually be really easy. So, there's always finance professionals, bookkeepers, accountants, that sort of thing to reach out to and work through that list you have. You don't have to reach out every time you have an issue. Make a little list and then book in a session to say, I have these, 6, 7 things that I know are wrong. Can you help me work through them? And also, what you should be asking them for is to help you understand how it went wrong or why it went wrong and how to avoid doing it in future. We can work through simply that list at the end of the year when we're doing our income taxes with our tax accountant. You can show up, you can say, I have this information and I know there are these issues with the data. They will be able to work through that with you, no problem. And obviously, if you have the time and inclination, you can go and research some of those issues yourself to find out how best to fix it, maybe how best to work around it if the system doesn't allow for the exact thing that you're looking for, and how to do it in your particular software. But with that learning practice, needing to hone your skills attitude, you're allowing yourself not to know things. And believe me, there's plenty not to know. So with that, we can research with forgiveness, not judging that we don't know how to do this. It's totally okay, and it's totally okay to make mistakes. Remember, you do not need to wait until everything's perfect, because it's never going to be perfect. And if it is perfect, it's probably not going to be perfect for all that long. If you would like to join the next training on how to get your bookkeeping done faster for more tips like this, because a lot of that resistance you have to dealing with your finances is mental resistance. It's that needing things to be perfect, needing to know all the answers. So for more tips on overcoming those barriers and some really practical tips on actually how to get your numbers done faster, then come and join the free live training on Wednesday the 17th of March. I've left the link for you to sign up in the description for the video. I hope you have enjoyed this comment. I would love you to leave me a thumbs up or a comment. As always, you can ask me questions and you can subscribe for more finance tips for small businesses delivered to you.